The big money world of powerboat racing, and this, the biggest of them all, the Cows Classic. It's a bruising 233 miles to Torquay and back, a race which has become a legend. 27 boats set off on its 25th anniversary, the same number which started the first race in 1961.
27 of the world's most powerful motorboats whip up the sheltered waters of Cowes Harbour as they come up towards the starting line. And with the wind building up steadily, they face a terrific buffeting over 156 miles of open sea.
And they're away. The race is on. Most of these streamlined boats have a top speed of 50 miles an hour. But out in more open waters, seamanship could be the deciding factor. Rounding the Isle of Wight, Bruce Campbell's Christina is in the lead, followed by the favourite, Dick Bertram of America, in Glass Moppy. The American boat is the most powerful in the race. Its 31-foot frame, shielding twin engines with a total of 660 horsepower. But a burned-out clutch ruins the American's chances, and Glass Moppy goes out of the race. Off Sandown now, and number 3, Tommy Sopwith's Thunderbolt is in front, trailed by the Italian entry, Esperanziella, number 16. For the next 30 miles, Thunderbolt stays in the lead for Britain, but the Italian craft is not far behind. Approaching Bournemouth, a force 5 wind churns up the sea, and the little boats are flung about by the waves, and for hours they take a ceaseless pounding. Speeds come down to 10 knots, but the lead changes dramatically as the Italian overhauls Thunderbolt when conditions are at their worst. By Weymouth, the seas have subsided, and Esperanziella is still ahead. But the Italian craft is in trouble. The storm has taken its toll. And with 2/3 of the distance covered, she gives up the lead again to Thunderbolt. Another American entry, Yo-Yo, only 200 horsepower, moves into second place. But with only 5 miles to go, she's nearly half an hour behind Thunderbolt. Tommy Sopwith in Thunderbolt wins Europe's first ever offshore powerboat race. The trip from Cowes has taken over 7 hours, an average speed of 25 miles an hour. And as well as making boating history, 28-year-old Tommy Sopwith wins £1,000 and the Daily Express trophy.
I suppose really you've got to start by asking how the race began, and the answer to that is Max Aitken, who was then running the Daily Express. He got the idea from an event in America, the Miami-Nassau race, brought it back, and he and Johnny Coote, who was then working for him, put together the idea of a race from Cowes to Torquay. I was a refugee from motor racing at that time, and the idea appealed enormously. I bought a boat from Bruce Campbell called a Christina, which had 2, of all extraordinary things, 2 Cadillac engines in it. And off we sailed, and we were blissfully ignorant about what was going on. And it was all a lot more fun and a lot less scientific than it is now. And there was the most extraordinary amateur atmosphere about the whole thing. There were 2 people who did actually know what they were doing, who came from America, Sam Griffith and Jim Wynne. Unfortunately, the expert, Sam Griffith, broke down before he got out of the Solent and left us to have a happy time for the rest of the race. It was a bumpy day, and we knew so little about it. I mean, there were no things like trim tabs or variable angle outdrives or ballast tanks or things that are now taken totally for granted. We just had this little boat which was adequately but not well set up, and we just had to get on with it.
This is the oldest race to be held anywhere in the world from the same location, the same weekend. It's always had a certain magic. I think Sir Max Aitken probably developed that magic in the early days. It's just very sad that he's not with us this year, but it has a very high reputation, and it's regarded around the world as the best race. And even though there are world champions every year, they don't consider themselves a real world champion until they've actually won the Cowes Torquay Cowes.
Men in powerful, sleek machines pitting themselves against the ever-changing sea soon captured the public's imagination. Competitors too, many of them gentlemen sportsmen like Sopwith, flocked to this new and exciting motorsport. Throughout the 60s and early 70s, when the race was sponsored by the Daily Express, its popularity rivaled most other major sporting events, but not so now.
A lot more people watched the race, there's no doubt about that, because all the cliff tops were lined with people listening to loudspeakers that were put there by the Daily Express, who had told them the day before and the day before that where to be, what to watch, and then produced the commentary for them to listen to. And, of course, that doesn't happen now.
There's number 400, that's Telstar, Tommy Sopwith's boat, 1 Daytona Scarab engine, 600 horsepower. Co-driver Charles de Selencourt. What a beautiful picture there. As you see the two, Tommy Sopwith and Charles de Selencourt in Telstar, the entry, built this year. And 500, the British-built Ultimatum, Bill Shankid's boat, designed by Don Aronow, at the moment the world champion, but going to lose that title very soon when this year's races are over. Built by Vector Marine in Miami, 1 Daytona, 500 brake horsepower. And they're in a bit of trouble, the engine cover is loose. The engine cover loose on Ultimatum, Bill Shankid's boat, number 500.
And here's 1, 2, 3, UFO, Tim Powell and Norman Barclay. They're two Holman and Moody engines developing some 900 horsepower, forcing them through the water on a reduced throttle.
The problem with powerboat racing, and this is really your side of the ship more than mine, is that it's so desperately difficult to cover. Now, if you take an analogy with Formula One motor racing, there is a circuit of 3 miles, 5 miles, whatever it may be, and you could put as many cameras on as many corners as you like, and you can cover it as thoroughly as you like. With something like, particularly the Cowes Torquay race as it was, unless you could cover it from Portland across Lyme Bay to get the real action shots, it didn't really make terribly good television. And it was so desperately expensive to do it, because if you were going to do that really thoroughly, it would mean not one helicopter, but a lot of helicopters. So what I'm taking rather a long time to say is that I can't see as bright a future for the proper offshore powerboat racing as it was, as there obviously is for Formula One racing.
A Cowes double winner and master of the drawing board is Don Shedd from Fareham. What changes has he seen?
Amazing changes, really, from the early days when we first came here, because there was not a marina, nothing. And there was little boat, the boats used to come, scrutineer there, and the first few races were really terribly amateur and amazingly good fun, probably because of that. And now, of course, the thing's changed into a pretty professional, very well-organized sport. When I first started, which was in fact the first race here I took part in, I mean, it was purely, in fact, just as a sort of amateur driver and a sort of complete spare time activity. And through the racing, and particularly through the Cowes races, and the Cowes Torquay and around the island races, I decided that maybe I'd like to do the design and had to be far more involved in the actual racing side of boats. And so I eventually dropped what I was doing and became a boat designer, particularly of boats to go racing on this incredibly tough course in Cowes Torquay.
What was the breakthrough for you as far as design goes, do you think?
I don't think there's one often talks about breakthroughs, but the interesting thing is that the particular boats you see here, and which are very seaworthy and able to go on the Cowes Torquay race, they're basically very similar to the ones which we were running back 25 years ago.
Really?
The deep V concept of the hull was originated by Ray Hunt in fact, the late 50s, early 60s. And every V boat which you see owes everything basically back down to old Ray. And there is a change in racing now in that, other than in England, very few races are run in the real rough water. The old rough races in America no longer start. If there's a Coast Guard small craft warning, they won't go out. So I think we've all got to try and make boats which are more suited probably to a bit flatter water than we get here. But of course that boat probably be no use at all when it comes over to England for this particular race.
The sport in general, and cows in particular, has always attracted those who have or aspire to a glamorous lifestyle. Whether it's the pull of expensive racing machines or simply the money behind the steering wheel, the jet set and fun seekers are never very far away.
Watching the tide roll sitting on the dock of the
The history of the race is peppered with personalities. A newcomer in his Class 1 rig Onyx is Stefano Casaraghi, the husband of Princess Caroline of Monaco.
For me, it's really a dream to be. I really want to do this race. I hope to finish the race because it's very exciting.
Among stars from the past, Lady Aaron.
It worries me certainly because I'm very frightened always of making an utter fool of myself, and I can just visualize all the men turning around saying, "Ah, woman."
The picture you see of a powerboat going kiss, 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 kiss looks great, and that is perfect in terms of the rapid progress of the machine. But crumbs, it does hurt inside. If you've got a lot of money, you can go powerboating. Or if, in my case, you know someone who's got a lot of money, you can also go powerboating. It is probably one of the very last sports where the man with a lot of bread can go out there. I mean, motor racing now has moved beyond that. The Dukes and the Earls that used to go motor racing, that's finished.
I remember in one race, Savundra was driving a boat called Jackie S. And he got it all wrong before leaving the Solent and wound up sitting on top of a little cruiser called Skipjack. And that made some quite exciting pictures, I seem to remember. But mercifully, no one was hurt.
Dr. Emil Savundra came to offshore powerboat racing in 1962 and literally made quite an impact. He experimented wholesale with boats and engines until the notorious crash of his insurance company in 1966. With no apparent ability other than to spend huge amounts of money, Savundra was dogged by bad luck, like the time he somehow managed to ram the Needles lighthouse. No mean feat, and he stayed afloat.
Yeah, I remember being bidden to lunch by Savundra one day, and it was almost a cartoon set that he had this piece of graph paper behind him, behind his desk. And, of course, it started at one corner and went up to the other. And I said, Emil, what happens when you just get up to that corner? He said, we're negotiating for the office above. And he was a naughty boy, but he was quite a character as far as the powerboat racing was concerned.
Another rogue who became more famous off the water than on it was Lord Lucan. Lucky entered the Cows race in 1963 and sunk. Not without trace, of course. How different the story was 11 years later.
And then when John Lucan disappeared, for some extraordinary reason, he had my name, amongst hundreds of others, of course, in his address book. And I was visited by the police on almost countless occasions. And one enthusiastic officer said, well, was he a great friend of yours? So I said, no, he was an acquaintance, but certainly not a great friend. He said, would you have given him the keys to your yacht? And I said, well, actually, my yacht hasn't got any keys, but undoubtedly no. And I think John Lucan only did the Cows Torquay race once.
Yes. Not seen him since.
And no, I can't help you.
Torquay Cows is the perfect test for high-powered speedboats and catamarans. The mixture of inshore circuitry within the confines of the Solent, followed by the more exposed seaways, puts the race in a class of its own. It's without doubt the greatest, but also potentially one of the most dangerous. With each monster capable of speeds of around 90 miles an hour, and each one carrying over a ton of high-octane fuel, accidents and fires are a constant worry. This year, 2 boats went up in flames. A spectator craft and Manhattan, a 27-footer in the cruiser class. Everyone escaped unhurt, but the time it took to put out the blaze reduced both boats to burnt-out wrecks. One way or another, the rescue services have been kept pretty busy over the years, from towing in boats which have either sunk or broken down, to throwing lifelines to unfortunate crews who've unexpectedly found themselves in the drink. Sinkings have been fairly frequent, but personal injuries over the 25-year history of the Cows race have been surprisingly few.
Powerboating isn't particularly dangerous. I'm pleased to say that we've only lost 1 life in the entire history of this event, and that was very unfortunate. The safety that we've got is probably second to none. We have boats covering from here down to Torquay and back again. We have a safety and rescue boat every 5 miles. We have a very sophisticated communications network. We have a helicopter overflying the whole thing. We have procedures for stopping the race in the event of a serious accident at the start. It's pretty good, and all the Coast Guard and RNLI and so on are impressed with our safety procedures.
Has safety procedures here contributed to the overall safety within powerboats, do you think?
I think the standards that we set here, other organisers would like to match all over the world. And the help that we get from various owners of boats who are prepared to go out and sit there for 6, 7 or 8 hours on quite nasty conditions is phenomenal.
Phenomenal is also a good word to describe the cost of Class 1 powerboating, on average £10,000 a race. The gentlemen sportsmen of the 60s have been replaced by the professional teams of the 80s, and sponsorship is the name of the game.
I don't think the character of the event has changed a lot. We don't have quite so many sort of rich entrepreneurs. It's now got a lot more commercial, and it's obviously got a lot more expensive like everything else. But to run a Class 1 boat today, you're talking about fairly serious money.
Yes, the Class 1 fleet has diminished quite considerably, hasn't it, over the years?
In this country it's diminished because it's not really a tax-deductible item, where the Italians seem for some extraordinary reason to get away with it, and various other countries can. So sadly, people in this country seem to be spending a lot of money on what's considered to be a sort of sporting activity, always sort of come under the focus of the sort of inland revenue, which is rather unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
Money's too tight to mention. Too tight to mention. I can't even qualify for my pension.
In the 1985 Cows Classic, the early leader was Nitro, a 45-foot diesel-powered giant driven by Fabio Buzzi, the Round Britain winner. The 1900 horsepower machine seemed to be coping well with the strong winds and 6-foot seas, but was soon to break down because of a blown gearbox. The first boat to the halfway mark at Torquay was Cinzano Bianco, a 35-foot Don Shed-designed monohull with 2 large petrol engines and Renato Della Valle at the wheel. This incredible Italian had won the previous 3 Cows races. Surely a 4th victory would be asking too much. At this stage, Cinzano was pursued closely by another shared Italian boat, Nuxi, but a flat battery put paid to her chances. Another casualty in Torquay was Onyx, driven by Princess Caroline's husband. Some way behind, but technically still in the running, Ideal Standard with Ken Kassir carrying the British flag once again. Kassir was the last home winner of the Cows Torquay Cows back in 1977. But this was not to be his day. The boat developed engine trouble and finished well down the fleet. That left Renato Della Valle and Cinzano Bianco way out in front. Barring misfortune, a 4th consecutive title was in the bag. The battle was now on for the minor places. Chasing Tim Hill's 12-litre double-two shirts for 2nd spot was Outsider, a Cougar-designed monohull driven by Salisbury's Ray Mackinhill. With its 2,200 horsepower capability, Outsider was the largest and most powerful boat in the fleet. A little did the crew know they were slowly sinking. Outsider, though, made it back to Cows in 3rd place. As for Cinzano Bianco, the jubilant Italians finished the race almost 1 hour ahead of runners-up Double Two Shirts. With its twin engines each consuming a gallon a minute, the 233-mile trip had taken them 3 hours 42 minutes at an average speed of 63 miles an hour. That compared to Sopwith's 25 miles an hour in 1961. Conditions had been so rough, only 6 of the 27 starters had reached the finishing line after 6 hours racing. A large crowd had gathered in front of the Royal Yacht Squadron to welcome Della Valle and acknowledge his superb achievement, the first man to win the Cows race 4 times. Waiting to congratulate Renato Della Valle, Gianfranco Rossi and Tim Mellery-Pratt at the winner's berth was Don Shedd, whose name will also go down in history. Cinzano Bianco was the Ferrum designer's 5th successive winner. So yet another glorious chapter of the Torquay Cows had been completed. Its 25th birthday producing a worthy winner in the best traditions of this magnificent race.
Can anyone still argue that this is just about the world's most exhilarating sport?
No birthday celebrations would be complete without champagne, and a slimline Della Valle elected his chubby teammate Rossi to sit in the scales and collect his weight in the stuff. Needless to say, the bubbly flowed all night.
66 bottles. Run! Seawood was 67.
Come on.
68 bottles of champagne. 69 bottles. Going. No, he's not going yet. 70, 71.
Another case.
I don't think I've ever seen such a big smile. It finally went down.
L'avevamo agganciato!
Right, good.